Hello, this is a new Mesh Baker tutorial. This one shows us how to use the batch prefab baker. So the purpose of this component is to deal with a very common situation. So often when developing a game, we have a number of prefabs that contain models or meshes, and each mesh uses its own texture and its own material, and we would like to modify those so that they can use they all use the same material, or so basically an atlas. So here I've got three prefabs. Two of the prefabs contain two meshes. This one contains a sword and a cube. The next one contains a cube and a platform. And the third one contains this skin mesh. And notice all of these use their own texture, their own material. So these cannot be combined using Unity static or dynamic batching, and they cannot be easily combined. Meshbaker could combine them, but you can't combine them using just the regular combine mesh script, which is very fast. So you can, using Meshbaker, create duplicate prefabs the old way, but I'm going to show you a much newer, faster way that we've recently added to Meshbaker. So actually, I'm going to leave these in the scene for a moment. So the first step is to create a new batch prefab baker. So it creates this scene object, which is basically just a regular mesh baker object, but it has this batch prefab baker component on it. So the first step is always to create the atlas that's going to be used by these things. So we select these three. First open tools for adding objects. Select these three objects. Add selected meshes. So this crawls down through the hierarchy, finds all the mesh renderers, and adds them. So it's added the sword, the cube, the platform to the list of objects to be combined. Now we create empty assets for combined material. We'll call it example. Oops. Cancel. Create empty assets for combined material. Experiment. Example. Yes, replace it. There we go. So we've got the empty assets, and now we bake materials into combined material. So it's creating the atlas. That's done. So if we look in here, there's a new example material, and it has this texture which contains all the source textures in one big texture. So now we have a material that we could use, but what do we go about modifying all these prefabs so that they can now use that material? So that's what the batch prefab baker component is for. So we can just feed it the raw prefabs. So even though we've got 5 meshes in the scene, we only need contained in 3 different prefabs. We just create 3 rows in here just for the prefabs. We can ignore however many the number of meshes there are and just focus on the prefabs, which makes it a lot faster. So I just drag the source prefabs in. There we go. These need to be assets from the project, not scene objects. In fact, I can delete these scene objects out of the scene now that I've done the texture baking part. Then we go over to the out directory, and I create some target prefabs. So let's duplicate this 3 times. We'll call it AA, BB, BB, and CC. And then I'm going to add those to the mesh baker. Notice it won't let me add them. That's because these prefabs are empty. We need to make sure those prefabs are game objects. So let's create 3 game objects in the scene and drag those into these prefabs so that these are prefabs of game objects. Even though they're empty game objects, that doesn't matter. I delete these out now. I don't need them anymore. I go to my batch prefab baker and I add these. See, and now I think we're ready. So I click batch bake prefabs. Oh, we have an error. Output option must be bake mesh assets in place. So I have to go down to the mesh baker component that's attached to this. The prefab baker uses the mesh baker component, and change that to bake mesh assets in place, and now we're good to go. Batch bake prefabs. So this out directory where I had my result prefabs now contains all these extra meshes. Those just got generated. So if I drag this, let's delete the combined mesh. There's nothing in the scene but the new prefab. It looks exactly like the old prefab. It's got the same hierarchy with the same transforms. If I had rigid bodies and colliders and stuff, those would still be on there. Any other custom scripts would still be there. The only difference is I've swapped out the mesh for this new mesh and the material for the new material that uses the Atlas texture. And there's the cube, which also uses the Atlas texture. And same thing for this other prefab, this platform. It uses the Atlas texture, and the skin mesh renderer also uses the Atlas texture. So you see it's very quick and easy to create 3 new prefabs that can take advantage of this new that can all share the same material. One more thing is you can create a scene like this that has a batch prefab baker, and once you've done all the work that I just did, which is it's got a combined material and it's got all these prefabs, or it's got everything set up, then if something changes in my source, in one of my source prefabs, like a texture changes or some of the UVs are modified, then you can just come right in here, click batch bake prefabs, and rebake these same prefabs, which you then use in your scenes, and the change is all propagated with one button click to all those scenes. So it makes updating, it has a very, very fast workflow. So Meshbaker is available in the asset store, and if you have any other questions, email me or look on the forums or post a question on the forums. Anyway, I hope everybody is out there is doing well.